My roommate hasn't been home for a few days and something strange has been happening. The door to their room has just been opening, and I don't know, should I be worried about that or scared? I mean, I'm sure it's nothing, right? I don't know, this is starting to feel kind of weird. And wait, is that a hand? Maybe I should go look into my roommate's room. Oh, you dumbass. She's being whack. Like, why are you walking towards the door? You're obviously going to die.
You disagree with her decision?
Yeah, but not just this decision. Most of the ones she's made so far. She's being so dense. Oh my gosh. Now she's about to go towards the door.
You're covering your eyes again. Do you not want to see this?
I'm covering my eyes because I'm scared of the jump scare. That's definitely going to come next.
When I'm scared, I hide or go away from what's making me afraid.
Yeah, but that's different. This is like fun scary. This fear is enjoyable.
I don't understand. I've never met another animal that does this. Why do humans enjoy being afraid?
Great question. Let's explore that. Hi, I'm Hans Dragoo. I used to go by Hanahaki, but now I go by Hans Dragoo, but you can still call me Hans. And welcome to this Halloween-themed video. Before we jump into why humans like scary things, let's attempt to understand the very basics of it first. That is, let's explore what is fear. That is the emotion that people feel when they're scared. Okay, a little quick warning. This part might get a little sciencey, but I promise it's not too boring. But in case science is just not for you, feel free to skip this chapter. This video will still make sense. So, what is fear? Fear is basically our body's threat response and is made up of many different parts. According to Dan Gardner, the author of The Science of Fear, and I will be quoting, fear can be a constructive emotion. When we worry about a risk, we pay more attention to it and take action where warranted. Fear keeps us alive and thriving. It's no exaggeration to say that our species owes its very existence to fear. And to expand on this idea a little bit, fear also exists in a lot of different forms. There's the social construction of fears, learned fears, genetic fears, innate fears. In the National Institute of Health's 34-page document about emotion, fear is actually divided into 7 different categories, which include things like active threat, potential threat, sustained loss, and frustrative non-reward. If that sounded kind of complicated, don't worry. We're not going to be going into that kind of detail, but I mentioned that part because I just wanted to show that even to health experts, fear is a little harder to define because it exists in so many different forms. And so basically, we define fear in a lot of different ways. But sometimes for complicated and complex things like emotions, it's easier to define them by our body's reaction to them or what exactly is going on in our body when we're feeling them. So let's take a look at the biological reactions fear produces in our bodies. Okay, so in this case, fear is a stimulus, which is a change in the environment that sets off alarms triggering 2 different warning systems. And they are what neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux calls the low road and the high road. The low road focuses on getting information about the cause of our fear as quick as possible to the brain. So it focuses on getting information about the change in the environment to our brain, specifically the part of our brain that processes fear, the amygdala. The amygdala is an almond-shaped part of our brain that is found deep in the middle of our brain. So I think somewhere here, like in the middle. I don't really know what way the middle would be here. And then the amygdala triggers a whole host of reactions throughout our body to help it prepare for fight or flight. So when you're really anxious and you feel like you gotta run away somewhere or you're ready to fight, that's a response triggered by your amygdala. So think that part of the brain, because that girl's overactive in some of us. So that's what the low road signal looks like. The high road signal is slower, but not by much. It only arrives like a second after the low road signal. And the reason why it's slower is because it's collecting all the information for our brain to make an informed decision on how to react to the threat in our surroundings. It's also doing this by collecting information from other parts of our brains, particularly the parts that are responsible for critical evaluation and slow and conscious processing. So the parts of your brain that deliberate a little more. So let's think of it like this. The low road signals tells your brain, hey, we're in danger, and you need to start getting ready to either get out of here or fight whatever is causing the threat. While the high road signal tells your brain, okay, this is what the danger is, this is what it looks like, and this is how we can respond to it, besides just fight or flight. So while the low road gets your body prepared prepared and, in fight or flight mode, gets the adrenaline pumping. It's the high road signal that actually decides whether or not you're in danger. Now, according to a scientist who I'm personally kind of a fangirl of because she is so cool, she's a sociologist, she's a scare expert. Like, that is her unofficial title, which is so cool. And she's also the staff sociologist at Scare House, which is a haunted house in Pittsburgh that literally takes all year to plan. It's that scary. You will never catch me there. But regardless, the sociologist whose work I adore so much is Dr. Margie Kerr. And so Dr. Margie Kerr wrote this fantastic nonfiction book that a lot of this video is based on called Scream: Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear. Anyway, according to Dr. Kerr, when we look across the time in the world, we find that people can literally start becoming scared of anything. An example of this was the experiment on baby Albert. And this happens because of something called fear conditioning, which is when you connect an event or consequence that is not actually dangerous for us with a negative consequence. So think if every time you opened a door, I screamed at you and it was like the loudest sound you ever heard, you probably wouldn't open doors very much. That's actually what happened to baby Albert, a little child in the 1920s who was fear conditioned into becoming scared of rabbits. He wasn't born scared of rabbits, but every time the scientists showed this baby a rabbit, they played a very large booming sound. And since baby Albert was literally a baby, he had no way of realizing that this wasn't dangerous because the problem solving and critically analyzing parts of his brain hadn't fully formed yet. He ended up getting deathly afraid of rabbits, specifically white rabbits too. And this way of conditioning fear into someone is called classical conditioning. Also, just to clarify, science does not work like this anymore. This was an incredibly unethical study that would not be allowed today. But the 1920s were a wild time. People were drinking Coke, people were conditioning babies to be scared of rabbits. It was a different era. Anyway, through this experimentation, we understand that even though there are some genetic and instinctive fears that we have, a lot of fear can also be taught to us through our socialization and what kind of societies we are raised in. Okay, that was literally all of the sciencey part of this video. And so now we understand a little more about fear. Let's take a look at fear and us as a species. Have we always liked to scare ourselves, or is this a recent development? We've been scaring ourselves for a very, very long time. We've actually been doing this since perhaps the birth of our species, through all kinds of methods like storytelling, jumping off cliffs, scaring each other by popping out from behind a cave wall. And we did this for lots of reasons, like building group unity, preparing kids for a life in a scary world, and to control behaviors. But it's actually only been recently that we've started scaring ourselves for just fun, because usually when we scared ourselves, it was for a purpose, but only recently have we started scaring ourselves for fun and money. One of the earliest examples of how we found joy in self-scaring is actually the story of one of the very first roller coasters, called the Russian ice slides. These are basically extended sleigh rides down a snowy mountain in the mid-17th century. Riders would sit in sleighs and speed down these snowy mountains, which included man-made bumps to add a little bit of spice to their descent. And then through the 18th century, this prototype for the modern roller coaster started getting spicier and spicier when they started adding things like wooden beams and artificial mountains of ice. Then the ice and sleds were replaced by carriages and tracks, and then to add even more excitement, they started painting scary scenes onto the walls to shock and thrill riders as they passed by. After they did this, they changed the name from the Russian ice slides to the dark rides, and people were scared, but they loved it. And now almost every country in the world has roller coasters, because if there's one thing humans like to do, it is almost be in danger safely. Now let's go back to one of the most popular and oldest forms of self-scaring, storytelling. Our earliest utilization of fear and also exposure to it may have come from scary stories and legends that were used to teach lessons, specifically to little children. For example, the Latin American story of La Llorona was basically this spirit of a mother who, in a jealous fit of rage, drowns her children and then walks around regretfully crying about what she's done, and then brings misfortune to whoever can hear her cries while she's searching for her children's bodies. According to Todd Thompson, an associate professor of anthropology and communications at USC, La Llorona might have been used as a cautionary tale to teach people about controlling their anger, especially around their children, since the story of the spirit subverts the societal norm of mothers being loving and protective. So legends like that might have been used to teach teach people to be careful. Scary stories were also very useful in early societies to teach children about natural predators like bears, snakes, and wolves, which is why so many cultural stories that are passed down generations across the world often have these animals as the villains. Because not too long ago, children were in danger of being eaten by wolves and bears and snakes. But then as these children grew older and started to wonder about the meaning of life and death and their place in the world, these stories began to reflect those newfound fears. So we got more stories about things like self-recognition, self-reflection, and the struggles we face with our own demons. The scary wolves from the stories like Red Riding Hood, which symbolize the dangers of kids going out into the forest or socializing with strangers, suddenly turned into stories about haunted spirits as symbols of unresolved trauma, or like in the case of La Lorna, cautionary tales towards adults. According to Talk Thompson, and I will be quoting, "The monsters are us in a sense. They are that very dangerous part of us, and it's good to recognize and be afraid of those evil parts of yourself." So the reasons I just discussed are why we used fear in our earlier societies and why fear was introduced into the way we communicate with each other. But going based on that, let's take a look at how we currently use fear today. And that introduces us to the next part of this video. How do we use fear? A lot of our stories in more recent times often explore our cultural fears. For example, scary stories told in the US often feature themes connected with the mistreatment of the indigenous people in America and those people who were enslaved. So we'll see tropes of things like a house being built on a Native American burial ground, causing supernatural events to occur. This, according to Professor Talk Thompson, is because as a culture, this past continues to haunt us in a metaphorical sense. I think here when he says metaphorical, what he means is that we can still see the impacts of a lot of these incredibly traumatic events today, because a lot of current generations of Americans are still carrying these traumas from what their ancestors went through, and the repercussions of which American society continues to grapple with. Another way our cultural, or even just the fears around us, contribute to what we gravitate towards in the horror genre is actually the very first piece of science fiction to ever exist, and that is Frankenstein. That's right, I'm going to be talking about my favorite goth girl, Mary Shelley. So, to explain this a little more, let me set the scene in which Frankenstein was born. In April 1815, the eruption of volcano Mount Tambora in Indonesia rocked the world. Besides the horrible destruction it caused in Indonesia, it also sent out massive clouds of minuscule particles into the atmosphere, which covered the sky across parts of the globe and reflected sunlight. This meteorological phenomena led to what was known as the year without summer. And even a year later, its impact continued, causing freezing volcanic winter with no sun, in which Mary Shelley drafted the tale of Frankenstein while she was on holiday in Switzerland. The story is actually really interesting because while she was writing this, she was also hanging out with Lord Byron, doing so much opium and just doing a lot of other fun things, which the article I got for this part of the video, I have linked it down in the bio if you'd like to read more because it's such an interesting story. Feel free to go peruse that article. But what's interesting is that Mary Shelley was confined indoors due to this horrible poor weather. And so when she was writing her book 2, she wrote about a time when there was horrible poor weather, time without sun, and a creature that was impacted by it or created in the midst of it, like the chupacabra in South America, the yokai in Japan, and the Alps in Germany. A lot of these monsters have a lot of features in common. Because human beings, due to our socialness, are so connected, the aspect of our fears bleeding into our horror stories might not just be based on our cultural experiences or even our locations. All these monsters tend to defy the general laws of nature. Either they've returned from the afterlife, like ghosts, demons, or spirits, or there's some kind of non-human, semi-human creatures, immortal or violating the laws that we know of death as we know it. This is due to the fact that as humans, we are terrified of things that violate the laws of nature, mostly because we've never interacted with anything that does that. During our evolution, we learned patterns and ways of being, so anything that does not perfectly fit into those patterns that we learned terrifies us. Also, as humans, we're terrified of the unknown, so that combination of things is deeply, deeply instinctively scary for us, because at the end of the day, we are animals, and all animals animals are scared of the intersection between things we're unfamiliar with and things that defy all the rules we are aware of. This is why things that don't really make sense to us or cause a cognitive or aesthetic dissonance, like contorted bodies, masked faces, basically anything that gives us a sense of uncanny valley, can be deeply terrifying. Another thing that all these monsters have in common is their blurred relationship between death and their bodies. We as human beings are obsessed with death and have a hard time wrapping our minds around what happens after it. My own video, processing the death of my grandma, is proof of that. But this fascination of ours with death has led us to create some of our most famous monsters, each within a culture that has explored the living dead in their own way, through zombies, vampires, reconstructed corpses, or even ghosts. That's right, Twilight is a perfectly great example of the way we've explored death. And this is what I'll use to justify me watching Twilight again for the millionth time this fall. I'm just trying to do a philosophical exploration of what happens after we die through a cultural depiction of that in the means of vampires. We want to imagine a life that happens after we die, or a way for us to live forever, which in itself, if we were ever to encounter a creature that is immortal, is a terrifying concept to us. Unless they look like the vampires from Twilight. Because immortality violates the laws of nature that we understand. Maybe this is why so many of our horror movies have stories about ghosts with unresolved trauma. Because what better way to justify and reason with the pain of the human experience than to immortalize it even after our own death? According to Thompson, there's an interesting role that these monsters play in shaping our cultures. He says, and I will be quoting, "People are constantly reinventing these stories to talk about what they fear and are haunted by. Newer examples of these ways of exploration are horror stories where there's a potential for technology, like evil robots, AI, other smart devices, to turn against its creators, that is us. Like in Black Mirror, or in 2001 A Space Odyssey, or even once the internet became more culturally relevant, we saw the rise of internet monsters like Slenderman, an abnormally tall humanoid that stalks and abducts children online. Perhaps this was a reflection of our own fears about online predators and how they groom young children. When these new monsters come up, Thompson says that it shows that people aren't too sure about this technology and that maybe there's something to be frightened about. As the conversations around AI and its usage, especially in terms of things like deep fakes or how it's affecting people's jobs, has started to bleed into culture, especially with things like the Actors Guild strikes that are happening right now. We can see these fears accurately be represented in the Black Mirror episodes that recently came out. I think in the first episode of the current season, that is this season, I don't remember what number it is, we can see that that's been happening. According to Alex Ago, a horror movie buff and director of programming and special projects at USC's School of Cinematic Arts, modern-day thrillers reflect our fears of technology and biological experimentation. Horror as a genre is an expression of the collective anxieties of a society at the time in which the films are made. They allow us to collectively get a sense of catharsis by vanquishing these fears. An example of this is how Godzilla, which is a monster created as a result of nuclear radiation, was created in 1954 in Japan as a representation of the shared anxieties the Japanese people felt about the lingering effects of the atomic attacks they experienced during World War II. According to Ego, you got this nuclear monster that's a stand-in for the bomb that rampages through a city like Tokyo. It's only by defeating Godzilla that you can achieve the collective catharsis. That is when the people of the culture are able to destroy the representation of their fears. At the very end of the movie, they're able to feel a sense of relief and a sense of, okay, I will be able to get over this cultural anxiety. In a similar way, the Friday the 13th series was a direct consequence of the growing fears in the 1980s of random acts of violence and the emergence of serial killers that were plaguing the public consciousness. And now with The Last of Us being turned into a TV show, where the villain or the monsters that we fear are the cordyceps that are actually a very real fungi that acts as a parasite for ants and turns them into zombie-like creatures. In the show, these fungi are able to start infecting people and cause people to also turn into these zombie-like creatures. This fungi mutates as a direct result of climate change, and so it's able to withstand the warmer temperatures of the human body. And so in this way, the show is able to reflect our current fears about climate change and how incredibly unprepared we feel about it. According to Ego, conquering the fear of death is at the core of all horror horror films. It's the way in which that problem is presented by the film that speaks to the specifics of the society at any given time. So to answer the question from the earlier chapter, when did we start loving fear? Perhaps for as long as we've been communicating with each other, because fear helped us understand our surroundings, protect the people we love, and make sense of our own impending morality. Okay, so now that we know all of that, let's actually get back to the question that this entire video leads to. Why do we love scary things? To really understand the way scientists have been looking at fear, here's a quote by Professor Glenn Sparks, who studies the effects of media on people at Purdue University. Fear is a negative emotion that comes about when people are under a siege of threat, and that is not pleasant. After researching this as long as I have not seen any empirical evidence that people actually enjoy the emotional experience of fright. Instead, I see evidence that people are enjoying other things that go along with this experience. Now, because fear is so hard to measure, since it's an emotion, we'll mostly be looking at it through movies, since art, from the beginning of its creation, has been the perfect place for us to display our emotion. The easiest form for us to see the way we've done it in and how that has culturally changed, at least for me, is through movies. Professor Glenn Sparks conducted surveys about people's relationships with scary entertainment and found this. Only about a third of the people said that they actually enjoyed scary entertainment. The other third actively avoided it, and the rest of the survey takers occupied a middle ground of sorts, where they said that they can accept some fear as long as it isn't too extreme and if the overall nature of the experience is interesting to them. Going along with this, a 2005 meta-analysis by Cynthia A. Hoffner and Kenneth J. Levine examined 35 different journal articles that studied the relationship between viewer enjoyment and frightening movies. And they found 4 common theories used to explain why some people love scary movies. Okay, so we're going to be going through these 4 theories, but I'm going to be starting with a theory that I least like from these 4, and it is called individual empathy. So this theory was devised by Ron Tamburini, a director of doctoral studies and a professor in the Department of Communication at Michigan State University, and it basically suggests that people who are less empathetic tend to enjoy horror movies more. This is because, according to Ron Tamburini, viewers with high levels of empathy should dislike horror films because they should react negatively to the suffering of others. Now, I understand where this thought process comes from, but I also feel like you can watch a lot of things and enjoy watching a lot of them without wanting to experience them yourself. For example, I love a good psychological thriller. Do I want to be psychologically thrilled in any way? Absolutely not. Also, I cannot tolerate seeing a character embarrassing themselves on TV or being really awkward. I just cannot tolerate that. It makes me so embarrassed. I have to close my eyes or speed through it or look away. I cannot deal with secondhand embarrassment at all. But a good psychological thriller movie, I can deal with that. That's very doable. I also have some friends who can stomach the most gruesome and intense horror films, and yet they're the most empathetic people I know. So yes, I don't really love this theory. So if you find yourself being I like really scary movies, but I don't totally lack empathy, don't worry, you're totally good, because we also have other theories. The second common theory is that people who tend to like scary movies share 3 common traits: sensation seeking, above average aggression, and maleness. Yes, according to this theory, apparently men usually like scary things. But this theory does postulate that men might like scary things, or we might think men like scary things more because of toxic masculinity and patriarchal ideals. Men might feel the need to just say they like scary things more, even though they might not enjoy it, because they might think this makes them appear more tough. But for the other 2 traits, this theory does say that people who experience heightened sensations might seek out scary movies because that is their emotions being in heightened state, while aggressive people might seek out horror films because they tend to show aggression. But it also does say that just because aggressive people seek out horror movies, there's not a causal relationship here. So horror movies are not causing people to be aggressive. Also, I do want to say that a lot of these traits that they found were self-reported, and human beings are notoriously bad at describing ourselves accurately. So those were the 2 theories that I did not love completely, but the next 2 theories I'm definitely more in favor of. And if you find yourself feeling the same way, please do let me know in the comments. Another theory is a phenomena called excitation transfer, which was theorized by Dolph Zillman, the former dean and professor of information science, communication, and psychology at the University of Alabama. Also, side note, I read this man's life story on Wikipedia Very interesting. Definitely recommend you do that if you like reading about interesting people's lives. He's really led a life. Okay, I know all of us have. Like, his is like life in bold, you know? I feel like I'm living life in lowercase, but this man's life in bold and capitalized too. Anyway, going back to the video, Zillman believed that viewers who experience fearful apprehension about deplorable events that threaten liked protagonists also then experience heightened enjoyment when those threats are satisfyingly resolved. See, when we're scared, our bodies experience spikes in our heart rate, in our breathing rate, and muscle tension, amongst other involuntary responses that come from the low road signals that I spoke about earlier in this video. And these kinds of symptoms of arousal are not very pleasant. But when this extreme sense of excitement or the adrenaline that's pumping through us wears off, it's replaced by an equally intense sense of relief. Because the only reason you're not feeling that heightened arousal state or those low road warning signals anymore is because your body's detected that it's safe. So you feel a flood of safety. And those positive feelings are almost as strong as those negative feelings you were feeling only moments before. And also this feeling of relief can make us feel like we mastered a fearful situation by going through it and still being able to come out on the other side. Glenn Sparks, the professor I talked about earlier, says, and I will be quoting, "People may remember a haunted house at Halloween or a scary movie and they think, I really felt good after that. They're remembering the intense positive emotions they had afterwards, not necessarily that they enjoyed the feeling of fear at all. There was something about the experience they remembered as good, even though they know there were negative things too." Because when we're in those states of fear, our arousal system is activated and it triggers a cascade of feel-good neurotransmitters and hormones like endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and adrenaline that influence our bodies. Remember Dr. Margie Kerr, the cool sociologist and scare expert who I fangirled about earlier in this video? Well, she says that when we know we're safe, we interpret the state of arousal as a positive experience. So we interpret those unpleasant emotions we were feeling earlier as perhaps something positive. In her words, all it takes is a moment, even less than a second, to realize we're safe and switch over to laughter and joy. This is why people scream and laugh in haunted houses. Psychologically, when we make it through a safe yet scary activity, it results in feelings of confidence, competence, accomplishment, and success. It's a real self-esteem boost. There's nothing quite like defeating a horde of zombies in a haunted house or jumping out of a plane to make you feel like you can take on the world. Dr. David H. Zald, a psychiatry professor at Vanderbilt University, added to this conversation by saying that if the rush or the high of the scariness is accompanied by relief or success, such as when we accomplish something despite the danger we're feeling, it can lead to a so-called adrenaline rush, which we'll then experience as positive and may even have an addictive quality, which will lead people to seek out activities and experiences that can lead to this rush. Malmedorf Anderson, an associate professor at Aarhus University in Denmark, who researches the cognitive processes involved in play and learning at the university's Recreational Fear Lab, which, what a cool lab name, studied a group of people who went to a haunted house visitor attraction. At this attraction, the guests voluntarily signed up to be terrified by brain-munching zombies, child-eating murderers, and people with chainsaws. Malmedorf Anderson and his team of researchers then filmed the guests, monitored their heart rates, and asked them what they felt at various points of this experience. The guests reported that they felt a multitude of emotions at different levels, like disgust, fear, jump scare, unease, being alone in the dark, claustrophobia, just a whole list of discomforting feelings. The other finding from this study indicated that we don't enjoy being too far from our normal physiological state, but that we do enjoy being a little bit out of our comfort zone. Malmedorf Anderson says that, and I will be quoting, "Our results suggest that there might be a sweet spot between fear and enjoyment. A just right spot where the context is not too terrifying but not too tame either. This sweet spot seems to be where the enjoyment is maximized, and it's at this very spot our fear is immediately replaced by a flood of relief, which results in the release of feel-good chemicals like endorphins and dopamine, which then rewards us with a rush of euphoria." So that is excitation theory. It's a third common theory about why we enjoy being scared. The fourth and final of these four theories is similar to individual empathy, the first theory I talked about, which I didn't love too much. But this one focuses a bit more on empathizing with others or being in someone else's shoes, without the dangers of being in that experience yourself. This theory explains that the watchers of horror films enjoy it based on their disassociation from the threats that they're seeing on film. According to Irving Biederman, a professor of neuroscience at USC's Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Science, and I will be quoting, "We like novelty, something that departs from our everyday experience. Some of the attractions of being scared come from the deviation of having a new experience that we know is safe." Now, building on the foundations of this theory, there's also a possibility that our distance from these characters in these horror movies acts as a way to help us explore what's going on in our own minds and our own lives. There's this place in Nashville called the Belcourt Theater. It runs horror films from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., so that's like 12 straight hours during Halloween. And its house media producer and programming and education coordinator Zach Hall has a little more insight on this. To him, movies offer a way for fans to cope with subconscious fear in a safe and enjoyable way. To quote Zach Hall, "I think movies offer a sort of safe space to experience a lot of things that don't work themselves out in our day-to-day lives that may be secretly eating at us or subconsciously eating at us. Movies make our greatest fear manifest in a safe space where we can actually cope with them. And I think the way that horror is going right now, I think it's on an upswing. We're going to see a lot of really great horror movies coming out of the immense cultural anxieties we've built in over the last couple of years. In fact, this disassociation may help us out in more ways than just sating whatever we are subconsciously grappling with." According to Malmedorf Anderson, the scientist I'd mentioned earlier, who runs a recreational fear lab, spending time in fictional realism that the experience of watching horror movies provides us with can almost act as an opportunity for the watcher to draft up their own instruction book for the worst case scenario of a problem that they're seeing play out in the horror movie. Perhaps this is why in March 2020, when the pandemic changed the world, downloads surged for a movie called Contagion, which is in itself about a deadly pandemic. And maybe this way of approaching scary movies is a really good idea, because according to a study on horror fans during the pandemic, it was found that people who like to watch scary movies might be more psychologically resilient than people who don't like to watch them. According to Malmedorf Anderson, these horror movie fans, and I will be quoting, have in some ways been exposed to similar scenarios and might use that experience to navigate new, uncertain realities. It is possible that recreational forms of fear in general can help improve emotion regulation and coping skills. Additionally, our enjoyment of fear might make more sense if we look at it as a form of play, where we're acting something out to understand it a little more. And this is what Malmedorf Anderson says about that. Enjoyment of scary stimuli seems to be related to getting a grip on unpredictable situations. Kind of like in the same way as when children play, these horror movie fans seek out moderate amounts of uncertainty or modern surprises in an effort to make sense of them. Researchers at Exeter University even found that when children's play involves elements of risk and fear, it can serve as a protective factor against anxiety. So if that helps children, I'm sure watching a scary movie carries the same logic and also helps adults. Okay, this is the last theory, and it's my favorite theory, and it will focus a little bit more on why we like to do scary things specifically around other people. Like when we go to watch a scary movie, ride on a roller coaster, or visit a haunted house, we're often doing this with our loved ones. James Cohen, director of Virginia Affective Neuroscience Library and the author of the Handbook of Emotion, Elicitation, and Assessment, explains that when we do evolutionarily salient activities, that is, activities that activate our fight or flight response, or just anything that influences our survival, by ourselves, we find them less rewarding because we've evolved to be together in times of stress. We're social creatures. We love being together because there's safety in numbers. And this is how our species has been able to last until today. If we experience a scary event in the safety of our numbers and around our loved ones, we know there's a higher likelihood that we'll survive because we're all together, and therefore we know there's a high likelihood that we're actually safe. Our favorite Dr. Margie Kerr says, and I will be quoting, "Haunted houses and amusement parks are inextricably linked to friends and family. We're taking on these challenges together, and in doing so creating stronger bonds, stronger memories, and feelings of closeness. If you watch people coming out of a haunted house, you'll see lots of hugs and high fives. Emotions run high when we're doing something scary, and sharing these experiences with our friends and our family can make us feel a lot closer to them when we're feeling our heightened emotions. This is why Dr. Care also says, when we're happy or afraid, we're releasing powerful hormones like oxytocin that makes the moment in which they're released impactful. So we're going to remember the people we're with. If it was a good experience, then we'll remember them fondly and feel close to them, more so than if we were to meet them during some neutral, unexciting event. Shelley Taylor, an American psychologist and professor of psychology at UCLA, discusses this very concept in her article called 10 and Befriend Biobehavioral Bases of Affiliation Under Stress. In this article, she shows that we do build special closeness with those we are with when we're in an excited state, and that this can be a very good thing. We're social and emotional creatures. We need each other in these times of stress. The fact that our body has evolved in a way to make us feel closer to the people we're with during times of stress makes sense. You know what I really love about this theory, and just in general about a lot of this stuff I explore on this channel, is that I always find out that no matter what, at the end of the day, the solution to so many human problems is to just be around and significantly bond with other humans. The solution to so many of our problems is just to be around each other. We truly do just always need each other. Like, yeah, maybe some of us like scary things, and maybe that's because it means we get to be around people we love and bond a little more closely to them. At the end of the day, all humans really need is each other. And I love that. I love that. We just need to be around each other. Like, human beings are so cute sometimes. Anyway, what do you think? Are those good enough explanations?
Yes, however, it is rather interesting how different humans experience fear than my kind. Fear is so trivial in so many of your lives that you have made a spectacle out of it to amuse yourselves. You build these contraptions, create dangerous activities, and make these movies to scare yourselves.
I mean, I guess cats could too?
I'm not too sure we can, because to my kind, fear is so much more prevalent in our daily lives to such a degree that I've never even considered enjoying it.
Why is it more prevalent in your life? You're an indoor cat.
True, but every day I experience sounds I don't understand, see things I don't have the senses to perceive since they're designed for human senses, and I'm surrounded by another species who doesn't even speak the same language as I do, and everything is so much larger than I am. I'm an ant among giants.
I never would have looked at it like that.
Humans have tailored the world so that your species can thrive in it, but it can be difficult for me. Everything is strange, human decision and intention are also not always clear to me. The world can be confusing and scary when you don't understand the perspectives of those around you.
That makes sense. I guess I never considered that maybe humans love scary things or doing scary things. We've been able to remove the terrifying aspect of our own mortality from it because our survival is basically guaranteed in some of these situations.
It's quite interesting.
But I do have to say, you've been a bit more daring recently and friendly towards other people. That uncertainty you pushed through to do those things, isn't that you attempting to enjoy fear to a degree too? Maybe in the same way that people feel supported and safe when they're around each other, so do cats.
That doesn't sound too far-fetched.
Yeah, I guess we aren't that different.
I guess not.
I wonder if this is like a social mammal thing.
No more wondering. Let's watch something else instead of that scary movie. Something with birds and squirrels and maybe other cats.
Whatever you say. But before that, let's go over to me. Hello, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. It's Halloween themed. Halloween is my favorite event of the year. I want to dress up in costume, and so I got something me and Chicken can match in, and it has not arrived yet. How can I attempt to slay in my outfit when Chicken cannot slay in hers? That is so rude. But yes, I really hope you like this video, and I also wanted to give a big thank you to everyone who helped me reach 500 subscribers. 500. Oh my god, this town keeps getting bigger and bigger. No, but like 500 is a lot, y'all. I've never in my life had 500 people perceive me. So this is wild. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it so much. I know that might not seem like a big number, but for me, that's a huge number. 500 is a lot of people. Okay, and as always, thank you so much for watching this video. Like it if you'd like to encourage me, or you can also leave a comment if you'd like to encourage me, or there was something in this video you'd like to elaborate on, or you perhaps have another point of view. I'd love to hear it. And actually, 1 like equals to 1 scary thing we can experience together. No. 1 like equals to 1 more person bonding with another person the same way they would if they experienced a scary event safely together. Very long, but I guess that works. And with that, I will end this video. Happy Halloween. Let me know what you're dressing up as. I love hearing people's costumes. I hope you have a great Halloween, and I will see you very soon. Bye!